The premature death of the British singer George Michael on Christmas 2016, just a few months after the world mourned David Bowie and Prince's deaths, felt like a final blow to the legacy of the 80s MTV legends. Entering the music scene as part of the duo Wham, he became a global superstar thanks to his solo album Faith from 1987. In his videos, he often wore swim trunks and skimpy shorts that made people doubt his image as a male sex symbol who drove women crazy. That bothered George for years, and he came publicly denying being gay. As he became famous, he began to deprive himself and consequently disappear. Georgios Kyriakos Panayotou was born on June 25, 1963. in East Finchley, London, England. Before becoming George Michael, he was a shy young man born in a conservative Greek Orthodox family. His father Jack was the owner of Greek Cypriot restaurant and had moved to England in the 50s. His mother was a British dancer. From their relationship, Yoda, Melanie, and Georgios were born. One of the leading artists in popular music in the 80s and 90s, he grew up in and around London, where he developed his passion for music at an early age. While in high school, Michael befriended Andrew Ridgeley, with whom he shared a love for pop music and consequently started a short-lived ska band called The Executive, along with 3 other school friends. Soon, George and Andrew would become a global success as a duo. In 1982, they landed a recording contract with Inner Vision Records and became known as Wham. Their first album, Fantastic, was released in the United Kingdom in 1982 and climbed as high as the number 4 spot on the charts there. It was released in the United States the following year. With their youthful good looks, Wham soon developed a devoted following among teenage girls. With their catchy song, Wham lived up to the title of their second album, Make It Big, 1984. They scored their first number 1 hit in the US with Wake Me Up Before You Go Go. The hit Everything She Wants and the ballad Careless Whisper were also at the top of the US charts. It was so successful that on April 7, 1985, Wham made history as the first Western pop group to perform in China. As lead singer and main songwriter, George Michael emerged as the star of the duo. It didn't take long for him to pursue a solo career, and in 1986, after the release of their third and final album, Music from the Edge of Heaven, George left Wham. At the time, many fans believed that the duo didn't get along, and that George decided to leave because he wanted to do more mature music for older fans, not just teenagers. He said that he wanted to put more honest emotions on his songs, creating music that people can personally relate to. In an open letter to fans, George wrote, "What's important for you to know is that no matter what you read or hear, Andrew and I are still the good friends we always were, and that breaking up with the band, while a difficult decision to make, was simply the only way we found to pursue our own ambitions with success and pleasure." George Michael was able to create a remarkable solo career. His first success outside of Wham was a duet with Aretha Franklin, titled I Know You Were Waiting. His debut album as a solo artist, released in 1987, titled Faith, is considered one of the biggest pop albums of the decade. Trying to shed his teen heartthrob image, he went for an edgier look. Often sporting a leather jacket and a few days' worth of stubble, he ended up becoming a sex symbol. Musically, the singer took a funkier direction as well with the album. Other hits included in were Father Figure, Monkey, and One More Try. George also created controversy with another track on the album, I Want Your Sex. Some radio stations in the United States refused to play it because of its explicit content, while others for the same reason would only play it late at night. Despite the censorship, Faith sold over 25 million copies worldwide and won the Grammy for Album of the Year in 1988. With the release of his second solo, Listen Without Prejudice Volume 1 in 1990, the singer intended to further shed his sultry pop idol image and be taken seriously as an artist. He made the unprecedented decision not to promote the record, refusing to work with the press, go on tour, or appear in music videos. In the video for Freedom 90, for example, he recruited supermodels like Cindy Crawford and Naomi Campbell to voice his music. It was at this point that George's career stagnated. He was in a contract dispute with his record label, Sony, instigated by his manager, because of his overly restrictive contract. He lost the battle, and by the time he released new songs in 1996, a lifetime had passed years in the pop music scenario. Older, a quiet, introspective album would mark not only George's return to music, but also a revelation about his private life. The artist dedicated this album to the memory of Anselmo Felipa, a Brazilian designer who died in 1993 of a brain hemorrhage. But this is a subject we'll address more in a moment. Two tracks from that record, Jesus to a Child and Fast Love, entered the US top 10. However, the record sales was weak compared to previous albums, with some attributing this decline to George's time away from the music scene. In 1999, the singer released a cover album entitled Songs from the Last Century. The album Patience from 2004 was his last studio album. A huge record sales and a lot of applause marked the career of George Michael, but also scandals. After his unexpected death on Christmas 2016, many facts about his life became known, and that's what we are going to see right now. George Michael repressed his sexuality, which lasted the first 15 years of his career and ended only after a scandal in 1999. That highlights the great drama of his life, and also inspired some of his most significant songs, such as My Mother Had a Brother, inspired by his uncle who was supposedly gay and took his own life. As a public person, he supported LGBT issues long before he made his identity clear. He donated the profits from Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me, a duet with Elton John released in 1991, to AIDS charities. However, George felt compelled to repress his feelings as a teenager and as an adult, falsely labeling himself bisexual even to his closest friends. At the age of 21, he had already achieved fame and wealth, more than he could dream of. It was in the heat and success of Wham that the character George Michael was born. He once said, "I created a man in the image of a great friend, that the world could love it if wanted to, someone who could fulfill my dreams and make me a star. I called him George Michael, and for nearly a decade, he worked hard for me and did what he was told. He was very good at his job, maybe a little too good." The glories and awards went to this fictitious George Michael, a fabulous creature he thought had nothing to do with who he really was. The singer realized that behind this virile heterosexual alter ego, there was a confused gay man. In his memoir, Andrew Ridgeley revealed that in 1983, they were in Ibiza, Spain, to shoot the video for the song Club Tropicana, and George called him one morning to chat. His words were, "I didn't know if I should tell you this, but I will. I'm gay." Ridgely's response was, "Oh, okay. Well, that's a little surprising." After the confession, the singer definitely seemed more relaxed and happy, probably because he realized it didn't make any difference to his longtime friend. Andrew also wrote that for George, hiding his sexuality from the media took an emotional price, as he feared that if he came out around the time of the Whamerica, he would not have any chance to compete with Madonna and Michael Jackson in the United States. Out of the spotlight, the star fell in love with Brazilian stylist Anselmo Filipa. They met during Rock in Rio performance in 1991. In an interview with Attitude magazine in 2004, George said, "I was happier than I have ever been in my entire life. Fame, money, all the things you know. Everything else kind of paled in comparison, and in bed with someone who loves you." Anselmo was absolutely that. This happiness did not last long. The stylist was diagnosed with HIV and died in 1993 from a brain hemorrhage related to his disease. After this event, there was a lot of speculation if the singer also had the virus, but this information was never confirmed. As mentioned earlier, in 1996, the album Older was dedicated to Anselmo's memory. George said in interviews that he exposed himself on this record. "I did interviews that said everything but the 3 words they wanted to hear. I was trying to maintain my privacy and dignity without lying." But without an explicit announcement about his sexuality, most people were confused, until he was arrested for Ludect for trying to have sex with a police officer in a public restroom in 1998. The arrest and conviction finally led him to publicly reveal his homosexuality and his relationship with Kenny Goss. Years later, he said that the decades of denial had made him feel like a fraud. He saw his arrest as a subconsciously deliberate act. George pleaded no contest to the charge of committing the lewd act and was fined $810 and sentenced to 80 hours of community service. Some time later, in allusion to his arrest, he played a police officer in the video for the song Outside. That was not the only time the artist faced the law. In October 2006, he pleaded guilty for driving under the influence of drugs, and 2 years later, he was charged with narcotics possession. In an interview to British newspaper The Guardian in 2009, the singer admitted using crack at that time and denied using drugs often. However, he admitted that he used it to smoke up to 25 marijuana cigarettes a day, and that he had reduced his consumption to about 7 or 8 a day, probably. In September 2010, he spent 4 years in prison after losing control of his truck and crashing a store in London. He was driving under the influence of drugs once again. Upon getting out of jail, he admitted that he was ashamed of breaking the law and that he was undergoing treatment to get rid of his addiction. Part of the reasons George Michael turned to drugs was his complicated family relationships. 2 decades before his death, the singer experienced a series of losses that would change the course of his life. In March 1993, he lost his boyfriend Anselmo Filipa. 4 years later, his mother Leslie Engo Penito died of cancer. As stated in James Gavin's biography, George Michael Alive, both relationships were crucial for the artist. James first described the singer's father, Kyriakos Penito, as intimidating and fearsome, adding that he was prejudiced like most men in his time and expressed his opinions in very unhappy ways, which affected George throughout his childhood. Leslie, on the other hand, has been described as a tremendously compassionate wife and mother. However, she shared the same views as her husband, because her brother, who was struggling with mental illness and believed to be secretly gay, had taken his own life. Over time, George heard stories about his uncle Colin and came to understand that his mother's echoes about his father's homophobia were born out of a fear that George might end up like Uncle Colin. So he forgave her, and she spent the rest of her life trying to make up for it. The singer's relationship with his mother grew stronger after the death of Anselmo Filipa, a relationship that until then was unknown to her. It was after this fact that George wrote a letter to his parents finally coming out. James Gavin wrote, "From that point on, their relationship was solid because she loved him even more. It was touching to know that she would go to George's house wherever he was at the moment. She would go there and do the housework. Anything she could do to show to George that he was cared for and loved." After making peace with his parents, the star's life had a short period of happiness and stability. But in 1997, his mother died of cancer. That's when his world started to fall apart, and he felt like the universe was trying to tear him apart. George experienced a whirlwind of self-destruction, including a decrease in his productivity when it came to music. He also surrendered to cigarettes and drugs like marijuana, crack, and cocaine. After struggling, George was able to find happiness in life and became a big-hearted philanthropist. After his death, several of those fighting HIV and cancer entities discovered that he supported them for many years. In fact, several of his actions were unknown to the public. According to information from Smooth Radio, he also tipped a nursing student who worked as a waitress $5,000 because he discovered she had a debt. In 2017, another woman came forward to reveal that he had anonymously paid for her IVF treatment after seeing her talk about her issues on This Morning. The woman gave birth to a baby girl in 2012. For biographer James Gavin, the singer's philanthropy helped fill the void in his life after his productivity decreased, explaining, "This was a way for George to make more sense of his own life. It was a cause that almost justified his existence at the time when making music became very painful for him." It's been more than 5 years since George Michael died. The artist left behind his father and 2 sisters. One of them was Melanie, who coincidentally passed away on Christmas morning 2019 after a diabetic coma. The 53-year-old singer was found dead at his home in England on Christmas morning 2016. His body was discovered by his partner at the time, the Australian hairdresser Fatty Fawaz. It took a few months to complete the autopsy and investigation into George's sudden death. In March 2017, the Oxfordshire senior coroner determined that he died from a dilated cardiomyopathy, a condition in which the heart becomes large and cannot pump blood effectively, combined with a heart inflammation. George also had liver fat, which can be attributed to a variety of causes, including alcohol and substance abuse. Latest photos show him looking tired and bloated. Even with the coroner's conclusion, there were those who speculated that he took his own life. Fatty Fawaz was one of those people. Elton John revealed that while George was alive, he was deeply unhappy and didn't want to live. But his family insisted that these rumors are false. A few days after his death, the singer was working on an autobiographical film where he would tell the backstory of his life. 6 years after his death, the production named George Michael Freedom Uncut was finally released, directed by his longtime friend, musician and songwriter David Austin. Lasting for almost 2 hours, the film is composed of unreleased images and homemade scenes belonging to the artist's personal archive, and brings the subsequent battle in justice with his label, as well as moments from his personal life such as the death of his partner, the Brazilian stylist Anselmo Filipa. In several interviews, George has made clear that he doesn't want the remnants of his career to simply be relegated to a museum or themed restaurant. His music is the most important. Everyone likes to think they'll leave something behind when they die. At the end of the day, I want to leave something as a writer, he said. It is tragic that George Michael died relatively young, especially at such a festive time as Christmas. Nevertheless, his legacy lives on, and we will always have his songs to remember him.